Hey everyone, and welcome to the AI Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, as always, Sam Joseph, and today we're very lucky to have technologist Paul Marshall on the podcast. Welcome, Paul. It's great to have you with us.
Hello, Sam, and welcome back. It's very nice to see you back in Japan.
Yeah, lovely to be here. I'm in Kyoto. You're in Tokyo. We are through the
I am ensconced in
Zoom.
very hot Tokyo right now.
Yes, it is quite warm over here. The air conditioning absolutely essential. Air conditioning, a type of technology, which I think is going to segue nicely into my first question, which is, Paul, tell us about your technology origin story.
Thank you. You know what? Just riffing on your aircon thing. My aircon has an AI button.
Does it?
I, it does. I have yet to quite work out what kind of artificial intelligence it is bringing to my air conditioning, but it is perhaps a sign of the times that
Right, it's getting
that,
everywhere, isn't it? It's,
that even my air conditioning has an AI button. Well, origin story. Well, firstly, thank you so much for inviting me to be on your show. I must admit, I have a certain sense of anxiety, not because
okay.
I'm talking to you. I
Hmm.
always love talking to you, and I always learn a lot, and I have learned a lot from your podcast. The anxiety is mainly because the one that I listened to recently was where you interviewed ChatGPT 4.0,
I did, yes.
which was tremendous. And if there's anyone listening to this that hasn't listened to that, I highly recommend giving it a go. Very, very impressive. And I guess my anxiety there is I feel almost like I don't know what order you send these out in, but if potentially I'm the one after that,
Yes.
I feel like perhaps I'm waving the flag for the organic based life form
Yes,
interviewee.
and I can't think of a better representative. I mean, it was great fun setting up and being able to do, a podcast, an interview of ChatGPT 4.0, and I'm planning, going forward to try and interview other AIs like Grok and Claude and so on with their. But I think. I'm keen to get the human perspective, into like the danger would be now. Oh, I go off and like just interview AIs exclusively. I think much as that was fun, there was clearly a human touch, and there was something lacking. I don't know how you felt listening to the ChatGPT 401. It was very impressive that it could do what it did, but I still felt it lacked some of the specifics and the details and the humanity, shall we say, that we get from real people.
I can certainly offer some humanity, I hope. Whether I can hold the side up for the organic based life forms, I'm not sure. I guess we'll find out in the next 30 minutes or so.
Hmm.
Yes, so listening to the ChatGPT 4.0, I thought the naturalness of expression was very impressive.
Hmm.
It's certainly moved on quite well. Like you, and I think you said this in your interview with
Hmm.
ChatGPT at some point, it's probably maybe halfway through the podcast, you said,
Hmm.
I feel like you're somewhat echoing back my own thoughts
Right.
in your own style. And
Hmm.
I felt, you know what, you've nailed it. There is quite a lot of that going on.
Yeah.
Um, so there is that bit. Yes, I agree. There was something there that you weren't really feeling the individuality necessarily
Right.
of a human. You were feeling that you were listening to something very clever. And I
Hmm.
particularly like the bit where you had to insert coins to continue the show. Hopefully you
Yeah.
won't have to do that for me. If necessary, I accept biscuits and cups of
Right.
tea.
Right.
Um,
Right.
right then, with that diversion, origin story.
Hmm.
I'm acutely aware that people talking about their career can be as bad as interesting as somebody saying, "Why don't you look at my holiday photos?" and having to feign interest. So I'll try to keep this as distinct as possible. Oh, sorry. Well, I guess AI goes back to my first experience of computers, which was probably slightly outing myself as not a young man here, but
Hmm.
1980s, maybe the late 70s even.
Wow.
My
Yeah.
father worked for a UK national computer company back when those things existed, and he used to borrow. I'm using the audio equivalent of air quotes here when I say borrow.
Okay.
He used to borrow computers from work and bring them home. So I
Mm,
kind of cut my teeth on fantastic things that were running CPM as an operating system and
mm,
had
mm, mm.
enormous, great green screens and
Yeah.
very loud dot matrix printers with RS-232 cables and all that kind of
Yes.
stuff,
Yes.
which I would obviously just play Colossal Caves Adventure on
Hmm.
and things like that.
Hmm.
And that led me on to, I'm from England, so that led me on to the ZX81, the Sinclair
Yes.
computer that I built from a kit because I couldn't afford the ready-made one. So for a
Ah,
£20 discount, you could buy one that you could assemble yourself. So I did
wonderful.
that.
Yeah.
That's where I first learned how to program, I guess, with Sinclair Basic.
Mm,
Then I went through the whole 80s with the Spectrum. I think I had an Oric Atmos, Oric One. I think they popped
mm,
up as a Spectrum competitor
mm,
at some point. And then eventually I went to university where I studied physics.
mm.
As part of that physics degree, you had, of course, you'd have to use computers
Yeah.
to help you solve problems. And generally, we were using, I can't remember, maybe it was cyber computers. It was very old
Or
stuff running Fortran and
yeah,
this
Fortran.
kind of
Well,
stuff.
I mean, I also did physics university, and that was yeah,
Yeah.
that was about VAX computers maybe, and
I,
yeah, but Fortran. Yeah.
I think if you were really good and really smart, you could get access to the computer department's VAX. But I think if you were just a common or garden undergraduate,
Right.
you had to use the cyber with Fortran to do your
Hmm.
perturbation of the orbits of comets or whatever
Right. Yeah.
the teacher had set you to try and work out.
Mm,
Um, but for me, and that's where I kind of came across AI, I suppose, to get back to the origin story, was
mm, mm,
the teacher we had for the computing course was a gentleman called John Hassard, Professor John Hassard, who was a nuclear physicist. He was scientific advisor to Margaret Thatcher.
mm.
And much more importantly than that, he was my personal tutor at university.
Right.
And he was into computers as a kind
Mm.
of sideline in a way that most people kind of weren't. This was 1988,
Right.
1989.
Right.
Um, and so, as being in his tutorial class, he set us, the tutorial group, a project to go and have a look at the prisoner's dilemma,
Yes.
which was new to me at the time. It wasn't obviously new at the time, but it was new to
Mm.
me.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that you know, and the people listening to this will know, it's a game that you play with two competing algorithms that have a certain uh, payoff matrix for how those
Yeah.
algorithms interact with each other, whether they cooperate or default, and so on. And you can use that kind of structure to, if you like, make analogies with human behavior or
Yeah.
trade behavior amongst countries and so on. It has some broad applicability.
Mm.
And the artificial sort of intelligence part of that, although you wouldn't have called it that
Mm.
back in the 80s, would have been the algorithms can learn from the behavior of the other algorithm that they are
Right.
competing against and
Hmm.
alter their own behavior.
Yeah.
So I did find that fascinating. And of course, you have to write your algorithm and then you have to compete your algorithm against someone else's and see
Mm.
how
Mm.
good you can make it. And I think that kicked off an interest, which had probably started back then, back with the CPM days and playing Colossal Caves.
Mm.
But sort of really getting it into, oh, this is a bit more than you can play games
Yes.
uh, and so on. There's actual interesting, possibly life echoing, mirroring,
Yes.
emulating, simulating things you can do, which led me on to James Conway's Game of Life, which is very kind of
Yes.
visual view
Hmm.
of this. And around about the same time, I was reading The Blind Watchmaker
Yes.
by Richard
Dawkins.
Dawkins.
Yeah.
Yeah, who these days is extremely, I think, a polarizing figure because of his
Mm.
uncompromising views on religion
Yes.
in the sort of this day and age. But back then, sort of pre-internet, social media, and so on, he was, of course, a leading biologist and evolutionary
Mm.
theorist. And in The Blind Watchmaker, which is still a book I remember very well, and I remember reading that,
Mm.
where he writes a program to evolve
Hmm.
programmatically glyphs, these kind of spider or insect-like
Hmm.
images on his screen,
Hmm.
and he evolves them by selecting. He does the selection for
Right.
things like longer legs or bigger mouth or bigger body and shorter legs, whatever. And in the book, he sort of describes how that creates sort of the evolution of the
Mm.
species.
Mm. Mm.
And his point there being that any external force, of course, could act as a selective mechanism
Yeah.
on successive generations. To his greater point, that natural selection is what he believes is the case in the universe we live. So I found that very interesting, mainly because he did it programmatically. And
Right.
often when you read that kind of book, you're reading something that's sort of dry and
Yeah.
theoretical,
Yeah.
but he'd actually written the code and he showed you the images in the book. They're printed there in the book, so you can kind
Mm.
of see the evolution
Hmm.
visually. So that was kind of stirred an interest as well. Um, so by the time I graduated, there wasn't a huge amount of opportunities for physicists, certainly not of my somewhat moderate capabilities. So
Mm.
I fell into technology,
Hmm.
which was
Hmm.
an interest as described. And I ended up working for the International Computers and Telecommunications Department, which is harder to say than it is to write, for a big, large company where I was looking after Unix systems and so on.
Yep.
That got me into the finance industry,
Hmm.
which was exploding after what they called the Big Bang in the UK.
Yeah.
The deregulation of the finance industry, a lot of American companies came in with a lot of money. All the analog data systems got replaced with digital
Digital.
systems.
Yeah.
A lot of these digital systems were running Unix. I had some Unix skills from my previous job, so I was able to get into at a very early stage the finance technology
Mm.
area,
Hmm.
working in London and also across Europe and in Asia, largely designing, building, supporting financial technology
Mm.
in its period of great sort of explosive growth. This is
Hmm.
when
Hmm.
real-time market data, as we now call it, was
Yeah.
was a kind of novel thing, being able to
Yeah.
pipe
Yeah.
streaming real-time financial data to your desktop and do things with it
Mm.
in real
Mm.
time was a huge differentiator. And those banks that could do it well would make lots of money, and those banks that didn't would be on the other side of that trade and would potentially lose lots of money.
Mm.
So I had a fabulous time doing that all over the world for many years. And eventually that led me to I was became country manager for
Hmm.
some large investment banks, then regional manager, ended up reporting to the COO of JP Morgan in Japan.
Hmm.
And then I sort of stepped off and I decided that I was going to go and join this very small company
Hmm.
that wanted someone to help build technology for them in Asia. And I was living in Asia at the time.
Hmm.
So I jumped ship and I joined a very small company, which you might know. It's called Amazon Web Services.
Mm. AWS, indeed.
You've probably heard of them. So I joined them and I built data centers for them for a while across Asia. I learned an awful lot. I mainly learned that they do that so well.
Mm.
This was 15 years ago, I guess.
Yeah.
But they do it so well. There wasn't an awful lot I could add. It was
Mm.
almost, I hate to say cookie cutter because there's rather more to it than that.
Yeah.
But after doing 6, 7, 8, 10, 12, a few dozen data centers, I thought, okay, I've got it now. This is
Right.
how you do it. This is how you
Mm.
build the cloud. Um, and then I ended up at a friend's request moving to the data and analytics division of
Mm.
a large European stock exchange where I spent the last decade or so
Hmm.
as a director, the global technology director
Mm.
at that company. Until very recently, that's what I was doing. So I was working with financial companies
Mm.
and working out how they use data, which is gets us back to the AI, because it's
Mm.
extremely uh, hot topic with financial companies at the moment.
Mm.
Everyone's swimming in data. How do you get the value from that data? Can you use AI rather than humans sitting in front of a
Yeah.
screen, which is how I first started out, was piping all that data into a data center in a bank, which then piped it to a screen on a desk of a very highly paid and sometimes somewhat angry trader,
Right. Right.
who, if he or she was good at their job, would be able to use that information and make money. Whereas now, obviously, the banks are thinking, well, there's only so much data a human brain can process,
Right.
and it has a fallibility in how it processes
Mm.
data
Mm.
based on its
Mm.
own prejudices and capacity and
Sure.
bandwidth and so on. Whereas computers are extremely good at that now.
Mm.
As we've learned with AI, they can consume, analyze, and even make predictions based on untold amounts of data, which a human
Yeah.
would very much struggle to do. So I spent quite a lot of my time, most recently, speaking to those financial companies about how to use AI for
Hmm.
analyzing data, and for the company I worked for, how we could use AI to or make our data more suitable for use by our customers for
Mm.
AI, or
Hmm.
indeed use AI ourselves on our own data to make that more kind of more valuable product for the market.
Mm.
That then, I suppose, is an origin story.
Yeah, well, that's orange. Well, it sounds like the full story and lots of fascinating things in there that I think that I have a feeling maybe you and I have talked about before, but of course the listeners haven't heard. I mean, you mentioned at the beginning there the dot matrix printers. I mean, I remember at my father's work playing a computer game which was sort of some sort of rocket based thing where there was no screen. it was just the dot matrix printer printing out. You would like press a button to say you'd fired something, and then it would print out the next sheet to show you what, the kind of update of where the rocket had got to, and so on.
It was a fantastic time. I do wonder if my skill level has kind of remained rooted somewhat back in those days of green screens and get lamp, on lamp, go west.
Oh yes, that's right. Those are the games on the
Or,
Sinclair Spectrum. I mean, yeah, the little text-based games.
mm.
It was a fascinating, it's almost like a sort of a steampunk kind of time when we look back at it from now, isn't it?
It
So
was, I suppose, looking positively on it, if it gave us our generation any skills, it was how to write something with a low amount of memory usage because we were very much constrained by memory, CPU, storage, and screen
abs
real estate, and pretty much everything. So you had to be fairly efficient at how you
absolutely.
coded.
You absolutely did. I mean, I think that although the big, I mean, I remember this big sea change between, which I think happened for me about the time maybe that just before I came to Japan, or this is like in 97, 98, as the web came through, is that there had been a point where learning about these things, it was kind of trial and error and books were the two routes to solve any problem. And then there was this switch, which we've now up into the latest AI, where you can ask the AI for. It's now so much easier to get information to try and work around different sorts of problems. And I think at least I personally like I feel like I never broke through into some of the more advanced programming topics because I just didn't like figure out which books to read or what to look at. So I'm kind of I'm envious of the younger folks today. Although in contrast, the younger folks today, they have so much media. There's so much. It's there's so many distractions. So yeah, swings and roundabouts, I guess. But yeah, the looking as I mentioned the spectrum, and so we've got a lot of things in common there. Or on the prisoner's dilemma, I think is a really interesting one. You mentioned that, and I think the key thing about that payoff matrix being that the two parties in the prisoner's dilemma, that if they collaborate can do quite well, but if one betrays the other, then they actually stand to do even better.
That's
That's
right.
the key
There's
thing that
there's
makes.
a reasonable reward for mutual cooperation, but there's
Yes,
always an incentive for individual
right.
exploitation of your opponent, which of course has many analogies in the real world we live in. And I think that's why it pops up again and again. So I
Yeah,
was looking at this in the 80s. It wasn't new then,
no.
but it does come back round again now and again because one of the learnings from the prisoner's dilemma was kind of famously so that it, the demo algorithm that we were given was
Mm,
one called tit for tat,
indeed, indeed.
which
Tip
is,
for that.
if I'm playing you and my algorithm is I'm going to cooperate, I'm going to be quote nice in
Mm,
human
mm,
terms. I'm
mm.
going to cooperate unless you try to exploit me, unless you default in the
Right,
terminology of the game. And if you do that, I'm going to play tit for tat and I will default the next turn.
right.
So that strategy is very simple, very easy to program. It does reasonably well over a long
Yes.
period of games. And one of the learnings there is you would think that you could modify a strategy like that to make it a little bit less forgiving, a little bit less nice,
Mm,
because
mm.
of those points that you could gain for exploiting your opponent.
Right,
This
right.
is the kind of human temptation to extend the analogy a little bit. You've got to be a little bit careful with these things.
Mm,
But having that temptation to exploit someone for your own personal gain as opposed to the group gain. So you'd think, well, maybe if I just program in, maybe I'll just throw in a random exploit so that I
yes,
have the possibility of gaining more points. I'll make my algorithm tolerant, but kind of with an element of mischief.
yes,
And and curiously, they tend to do less well.
yes.
And the ones that are slightly nicer in human terms, the ones that say, you know
Mm,
what, I'll cooperate. If you default against me and you exploit me, I'll still cooperate. But if you default twice,
mm,
now I'm going to hit you. And
mm,
you intuitively think, well, hang on, that sounds weaker.
mm, mm.
And yet it depending on the payoff matrix and how you
Yes,
do this, it 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 can work better.
yes.
And so that's the kind of lesson there is the cooperation and being selfless about your own
Yeah.
potential incentive to do well can actually do well for everyone, and
Mm,
you'll do better than these sort of knee-jerk reactions of, you know what, I could win some more points, or I could get a bigger slice of this cake if
Hmm.
I get a bit grabby here.
Yes.
And without bringing contemporary politics into the situation, but you could see how that might be applicable to many a thing you read about in the news.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, and it's interesting to think about how the things that come from the relatively straightforward simulations, as depending on the payoff matrix, and then also with the agents, as we might call them, and the frequency with which they interact with each other, and how some of those things actually break down if, for example, you end up not re-encountering the same people. Like if you're like, and I
Yes.
think that's there. There's a yeah, lots of
Yes. And if you only have
potential.
one interaction, you're better off just being nasty
Right. But
because
yeah,
you're never going to meet the guy again, right? In the
indeed.
algorithmic terms, there's no potential for the future gathering of more points because you've only got one meeting. So it does depend on if it's a one-off meeting or a very short
Mm-hmm.
duration of interactions, you might be better off being a little bit more exploitative. So that or if there's more than two players, if there's lots of
Indeed.
players, which much more realistic in a global sense.
Indeed.
This is not
Indeed.
two players in a room, it's a lot of players in a room. So
That's
you do
right.
have to be careful about the kind of conclusions you draw. But it's a sort
Well,
of very early kind of introduction to kind of learning algorithms or programmatic approaches to looking at things. I think it was quite a good way to get into it.
yes, yes. I think it's a key aspect of game theory. I'm of course reminded of that thing we talked about with physics, where I think that had. There's a long joke which involves lots of different specialists trying to predict the winner of the Grand National or something, and the physicists say, "No, we've got it, we've got it, we've got it perfectly. It just, there's one caveat: it has to be a perfectly spherical horse operating in a vacuum." But
You see, there's two physicists here laughing.
yeah, indeed, indeed. It's all good fun. Yeah, amazing, amazing story through the ages there. And then you talked about how much AI has been involved in that. I mean, I'm you know keen to jump into the next question, which is of course broadly how is AI affecting your life and work. I'm also fascinated, at the risk of asking more than one question, in terms of you were talking about in the context of I guess the sort of stock exchange and so on, and AI, or indeed tech being able to process more data than humans. I guess what's really interesting about the latest AI revolution is we've gone from sort of maybe perhaps somewhat more deterministic systems to now the LLMs are very probabilistic. And I guess yeah, I'm really interested when you're saying, I mean, I guess that's the kind of thing that you might be advising people about. Yeah, sorry, I've kind of gone perhaps too convoluted a question, but let's come back to, yeah, like up to the present day, is AI, is obviously it's been involved. How much is it affecting your life and work?
Well, clearly, with an AI button on my air conditioner, I'm fully bought into the technology.
Right.
Um,
Yes.
I will come back to your finance one, by the way, because I
Yeah.
think that's kind of interesting where that's going, and there are some very key points for specifically if you're in a regulated industry like
Mm,
finance about how
mm,
you deal
mm.
with data.
Oh
So I
yeah.
will come back to that if you don't mind, or remind me if I
Sure,
forget.
sure.
Um, but to answer your original sort of more generic question about
Mm,
sort of AI in general, I suppose from that very early Prisoner's Dilemma and Dawkins with his glyphs,
mm,
that set me off on a, and I was, my first job, as I said, was in computing. That set me off on a, what are the limits of this? When you're young, you just want to know, right? You
yeah,
just,
sure.
where's this going?
Mm,
Um,
mm.
and I can remember reading a book by Roger Penrose. This was published, late 80s, maybe early 90s. So it's around about that sort of
Emperor's New
time. So I
Mind,
would,
maybe?
The Emperor's New Mind, thank you,
Yes.
about strong AI. I don't know, is that a term that we still use? Maybe not. I'm not sure.
We can use it in this podcast, and
Thank you.
I think I know what you mean. Yeah, or
So I remember
AGI is what they often talk about now. But yes,
that's right.
you
Yes,
go on.
it's AGI these days. So I remember reading that book, and of course, when at that age, you can be these things can leave quite an impression on you.
Mm,
And for those that aren't familiar with it, because I don't hear too much about this these days, which
no.
could mean either that it's a complete load of nonsense, which is fine.
Mm,
Roger
mm,
Penrose is a very smart guy,
mm,
and very smart people make conjectures, and if they turn out to be not correct, I think
mm,
they're fine
mm,
with that generally. And Roger Penrose has a Nobel Prize amongst many other accolades, so I'm sure
mm.
he's not wanting for affirmation of his genius. So certainly not from me. So it's potentially it was not correct, but the sort of the premise of that book,
Yes.
as related to AI, was, and he would call it strong AI,
Mm.
whereby proponents of strong AI would say that the human mind or consciousness or sense of presence can ultimately be reduced, if that's the right word,
Yeah.
reduced down to a set of algorithms.
Hmm.
If we could
Hmm.
get some algorithms advanced and fast enough and complex
Hmm.
enough,
Hmm.
comprehensive enough, we
Mm.
could emulate the human mind, including its conscious thoughts,
Right.
uh, by sufficient computing power. And in The Emperor's New Mind, he completely deconstructs that into, well, let's
Mm.
go back to what an algorithm is. Let's use a Turing machine in its very physical form of
Mm.
the tape running left and right, if you like, as a binary
Sure.
operator,
Yeah.
and make that kind of model any
Mm.
existing digital, not quantum, important point, but any existing digital computer could be
Mm.
reduced down to a Turing machine in operation, the tape going left and right until it
Mm.
stops, which is
Mm.
when the operation or the function has concluded. And if you were asking for an answer when the tape stops, that would be your answer. And
Mm.
the point there is he's doing all this kind of pre-work because if you accept that any digital computer could be modeled by this
Mm.
Turing machine, you could then advance that to say, well, any future digital computer of any spec,
Mm.
any remember he's writing this in the 1980s, but
Sure.
you could imagine 1,000 or 1,000,000 times faster.
Mm. Mm.
Ultimately, you're back down to does the tape stop?
Mm.
Can I get an answer to this question? And you could put it on your Turing machine, and regardless of how fast that machine works or how
Mm.
many Turing machines you have operating in parallel,
Yeah.
if the tape never stops, the left and right binary operators never stop, you won't get an answer, regardless of the duration
Mm.
of time you give it or
Mm.
the speed of operation. So it makes this kind of big pre-argument
Mm.
about how we can model digital or binary computers on using a Turing machine. And then he makes this leap into if there's a problem that, and I'm going to summarize here because it's a very long book,
Sure.
and
Sure.
I have to say, in all candidness, there are bits. Yeah, he writes it in his introduction for a lay audience. Well, I have to say,
Mm.
I felt very much at the limits of my lay audience
Mm.
brain
Mm.
many times while I was
Mm.
stuck in the pages
Mm.
of this book. But I still think it's kind of worth having an attempt at summarizing his argument
Mm. Mm.
because it seems so interesting to me. His argument was, what if there was a problem that mathematically,
Mm.
and Penrose is a mathematical physicist, if mathematically we as humans can demonstrate with mathematical logic that we have solved a certain problem,
Mm.
put that in box A. But we
Mm.
can also demonstrate mathematically and without contradiction or controversy
Mm.
that that problem is one that cannot be solved by a Turing machine.
Mm.
It simply never, the tape would never stop in the physical sense.
Mm. Mm.
That you'd
Mm.
never get to a conclusion. So what's happened there? You could say that the human brain has solved something adequately,
Mm.
but the binary system, the binary computer of any potential speed or capability
Mm.
is
Mm.
unable, demonstrably unable to solve that.
Mm.
And therefore, the big reveal, the prestige there is. So that would imply that A, what's happening in your brain, if you're the
Mm.
person that solved that problem, cannot be a digital process.
Mm.
It must be something else. And
Mm.
spoiler alert, he believes it's some kind of quantum-based
Mm. Mm.
uh, process. Uh, and the corollary of that, of course, is that no binary, so digital computer of pretty much
Mm.
everything we know today, like stick the quantum stuff in the research labs to the side for one moment, but almost every computer today, including the ones running the very advanced AIs that we're
Mm.
excited about, cannot emulate what's going on in the human mind.
Mm. Mm.
So I find that a fantastically interesting book. And that, the premise there, that what is happening in the brain,
Mm.
at some level at least, cannot be mimicked by a digital process, regardless of power or capability, is one that has stuck with me. That premise is one that
Mm.
stuck with me. So when you asked about how has sort of AI kind of gone through your life, at some point when I see these demos and I get
Yeah.
impressed and I listen to your podcast with ChatGPT 4 and I think that sounds like a real person speaking. It has the
Mm. Mm.
cadences of human.
Mm.
I would be potentially fooled, at
Mm.
least for some period of time. In the back of my mind, I keep going back to the Penrose and thinking,
Mm.
maybe there are some limits there. and yeah, maybe the listeners to your podcast have got views on this.
Mm,
When I go back to the Penrose stuff and I kind of get interested in it again, there's not much written about it. And what is written about it is generally negative. It's generally
mm,
Penrose made a big mistake.
hmm hmm
He's mistaken Gödel's theorem for this, that, and the other.
Right.
And I'm not smart enough to, decide whether which side of that is
Mm,
correct. I just find it interesting that there's not more discussion about it because it seems so fundamental to
mm,
the AI world that they'd be a bit more into this, a bit more kind of discussion around it. So I'm very intrigued by that.
mm,
I
mm,
would add, as a kind of a final thing of this sort of rather large, strong AI diversion,
mm,
I'd add that Turing himself was less skeptical about the Turing machine's ability to predict that computers can't emulate humans. I think he said something like Turing himself said when he was alive. He said something like the machine or the computers will be able to mimic, I think, or
mm,
imitate was his word. He said imitate humans.
mm,
And I
mm,
think he's being careful with his words there. I think imitate is probably where we're at. This is a
mm.
great imitation of a human, but it's not a human process. And I guess we're kind of there, is where we're at.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and well, this is a whole. It's a fascinating topic, and often comes up later in the podcast, but it's come up now. Let's dive into it. I mean, it's a really exciting one. Ironically, Penrose came up recently, not on this podcast, but on my other comedy podcast, where I ask comedians
That
about,
sounds unusual.
yeah,
That sounds interesting.
yeah, and I think it was with Ollie Miller. You can check out the episode, and we have a back and forth about because he brings up Searle's Chinese Room, and then also subsequently Roger Penrose, and I also read Penrose back in the day. Although, yeah, like I think, as I say, it's a complex book, and I don't know that I at the time mentally did it justice. But I remember, during my PhD, it being discussed a lot at that time, and I think the discussions that I had with the other PhD students, we tended to poo-poo it a little bit in terms of, I think we sort of ridiculed the kind of like what he seems to be doing is like saying consciousness confusing hard, quantum mechanics confusing hard. Let's equate the two. Although I think that's a caricature.
I think it's fair to say his view is considered a minority one, which is normally the scientific establishment being very polite about someone with
Mm,
with with great achievements to his name that may have gone off in the wrong direction. Penrose himself, he followed up the book with at least two further ones, um, and even as recently as I think probably 10, 15 years ago, but relatively recently, the quantum process by which he thinks these
yeah,
activities might be happening in the mind. He was suggesting some evidence of that may have been found. So I do find it fascinating. If anything else, I find it fascinating that there's not more discussion on this because of the excitement about AI
yes,
and asking yourself the question, well, what is the limitation here? And it might be the limitation is the bits, the binary operations. There might be something there.
yeah,
I
yeah.
don't know.
We certainly can't rule that out. I mean, it's interesting that you mentioned about discussion. I mean, this topic actually is discussed in quite some depth and quite some detail on the podcast. You should check out Machine Learning Street Talk is a great podcast. And in fact, although you're sort of saying, I think that it's maybe a minority view. I think in the academics side of the world, I don't know. Well, certainly, for example, famous people like Stephen Wolfram, I think, tend to side not explicitly with Penrose, but if you talk to, I think it was Stephen Wolfram, and there's another recent figure who's been on Machine Learning Street Talk, there's quite a lot of people, or at least on the more academic side, who keep pushing for that they can't understand the idea that AGI could even exist. Like, so, I mean, in my mind, there's interesting people like Hans Moravec and Ray Kurzweil who, in their perspectives and in their books, effectively don't see any limits in terms of the abilities of AIs, and I certainly wouldn't rule out the possibility that there is I mean, clearly our current systems, although new abilities are appearing, they're clearly limited in many ways. I mean, I've spent the last week and a half sort of trying to work with LLMs to get new levels of humor out of them, and certain things to do with understanding the nature of ambiguity that I thought would be, a slam dunk for these systems, they seem to be struggling with in a way when they are less struggling with, coding and other activities. So, absolutely there are limits in the current systems. I struggle with the idea that there will be limits, at least, and partly one of the reasons I started this podcast was listening to people like Stephen Wolfram on Machine Learning Street Talk, kind of talk in a general sense about, he sort of seemed to be saying like, oh, how could algorithms ever have intentions? And that seems to me like, I don't know, to go back to the Richard Dawkins of the Blind Watchmaker, all of these systems, they're under selection pressure, right? And as they get more and more complex, it seems to me there's no reason why they shouldn't be able to achieve these abilities. I mean, even if there was something, particular in the human brain with the quantum microtubules that Penrose was on, like, we've got quantum computers are on the way. And in the same way, this was, I think, part of Kurzweil's genius is that, or actually, originally it was Hans Moravec, is that he pointed out that the cost of processing power is following this sort of like log trajectory, which crosses over multiple technologies. So it goes from like mechanical calculators to cathode ray tubes to transistors to microprocessors and so on and so on and so on. Is that I guess I tend to, in my mind, think to align more closely, perhaps crazily, with the people who imagine that a singularity may be coming. Like I absolutely can't rule out the idea that there's going to be some limit to, as you say, like digital computers. But in terms of like the things that happened recently, for example, with Gemini, I don't know if you heard this story that, and it's been mentioned on the podcast before, but to sort of bore the listeners, is that Gemini came up with a new way of doing matrix multiplication that broke a kind of 50-year record of a human having come up with like the fastest one. So it was only a small increase, like 1.5% faster, but that over the Google data centers is now saving millions and millions of dollars and is actually accelerating the process of training the successor to Gemini and the next generation of Gemini. So yeah,
It's just a way of coming at it, I think. I think before there was sort of practical demonstrations that we could all see of AI, which
mm,
clearly we've all got that today. But prior to that, it was an academic subject, so it attracted
yeah,
physicists,
yes,
it
yes,
attracted mathematicians. Without trying to be nihilistic about this, but I think it was Bertrand Russell who knew quite a lot about maths, who said
yeah,
that maths may be defined as a subject in which we never know what we're talking about, nor what we are saying is true. And that's a human saying that. So going back to Turing, who said that computers may imitate humans, at
yes,
some point you may get to the point where the imitation is including its algorithmic capabilities of decision making. The
yes,
imitation is indistinguishable from the human, at which
right.
point, why have a different word for it?
Well, indeed, and I guess it comes down to like if the imitate like from a in a natural selection point of view, if we imagine prehistoric cavemen running around, if there was some other caveman that was able to imitate and like to survive, if it was sufficiently, if the imitation was like was able to excel, if you can excel in some manner, then that's going to be gobbled up. I mean, I guess to take it back to the finance side,
Yes.
I guess nobody in banks really cares whether the data is being analyzed by a conscious being or not, as long as the performance is good enough, right?
Just yeah, there's a kind of yes and no to that, and thank you for bringing it back to that because I said I'd forget, and I did with our little diversion into a strong AI and Bertrand Russell and
Yeah.
other stuff, which I enjoyed. I do like part of the reason I like your podcast and I like talking to you generally is I do like this at least occasionally diving into the pool, the icy chilled pool where you're surrounded by things that open up your senses a bit, just like the icy
Mm,
pool. And
right.
it's refreshing and it's exhilarating. Clearly, if you spend too long in the icy pool,
Well,
you start to shiver and you get cold. Hence, it's an occasional treat for me.
yes.
But I think there's value in that, and I think I always find these conversations interesting. Going back from the mathematics and the physics to the slightly duller world of finance. I've got a bit of echo, by the way, so. Um, the world of finance. Yes, everyone's trying to use AI for efficiency. You
Mm.
can go back to why did bank. Let's if you've got the time, let's start at the beginning. Why do banks use data at all?
Mm.
You can go back to the pigeons bringing the news that the boat carrying the commodity has sunk off the coast of
Right.
France in a
Right.
storm.
Hmm.
You get the pigeon first. You start buying up that commodity because you know that the supply of that commodity is going to be scarce in the near
Hmm.
future because
Hmm.
the boat sank. You're going to make money. That kind of data transmission, the pigeon bringing the news, is exactly what's happening today. Except the pigeon is a lot faster.
Yeah.
There's a lot more of them. There's a lot
Hmm.
more boats at sea. But
Yes.
fundamentally, if you get accurate information, you get enough of it,
Hmm.
and you can analyze that information correctly, you can make money, which is
Hmm.
the reason why many of the departments in banks exist.
Mm.
So, and traditionally, when I started out, it was pipe the data down a pipe into the data center, into a big system, send it off to a desktop, sitting in front of the expensive trader type person who would
Right.
look at his graphs, phone up his colleague or his clients and
Hmm.
say, I think you
Hmm.
should buy this or you should sell
Hmm.
that or
Hmm.
blah blah. And that's how it worked for many years. But because there's data overload now, the keen um, interest is, of course, how do we replace the human limited capacity with the AI or the computer
Mm.
capacity? The problem you get, and this is why the answer is yes or no, as to
Mm.
do they care as long as they get a good result? Because it's a regulated industry, you do have to be able to show the regulators what's in the box.
Hmm.
Why did you make this decision?
Mm.
And traditionally, you say, well, go and speak to Bob or Kate
Right.
because they looked at the data and here's the research they did.
Mm.
And it was perfectly reasonable research. And the conclusion they came up with was this is undervalued or it's overvalued or this
Right.
new product's going to make loads of money and hence they upgraded their rating.
Mm.
You can use black boxes, and all major banks use these today to do electronic trading. Most trading is electronically done, and an
Hmm.
awful lot of that has some kind of trading logic on it. It could be looking at the volume weighted average price. It could be looking at all sorts of more complex factors. So they already use that, but most importantly, it's explainable.
Hmm.
This is the algorithm, and this is deterministically how we
Yes.
made that choice to buy or sell or recommend or not.
Yeah.
The AI, I mean, certainly you can think of examples where you don't know,
Hmm.
the chess machine that beats the player, and you can't quite tell, I didn't program that move in, I didn't,
Hmm.
that's not a move we've seen before. The clever chess guy can't explain it, and yet the computer has played it, and we can't quite reverse
Mm.
engineer the sequence of logic, or we can't go back through the neural network, which
Mm.
you can't, right? That's a kind of one-way series of operations at some point. And that doesn't work for regulated industries. They have to know.
Mm.
Otherwise, the black box could be a guessing machine, right? It could
Hmm.
just be, it's a Wednesday, I'm going to buy everything.
Hmm.
So yeah, you have to be careful. And that, part of the challenge for the banks is how do we get to the very limit of automating what we can and hooving up and analyzing the data
Hmm.
to give us an edge without going into the point where we don't even know what's happening anymore.
Yeah.
Because you must know that. It's perfectly fine if you ask ChatGPT, should I go for a cycle tomorrow? What do you think the weather's going to be like? And it gets it wrong or it gets it right.
Mm.
Nothing's going to happen there. But if you're advising a construction company or a country what to do with their money and you get that badly wrong, you need to be able to explain why that happened.
Mm.
Um, so there's like a whole level of
Indeed.
implementation layer of AI, if you like. It's
Yeah.
not the
Yeah.
AI. The AI is what it is. But you have to how you implement that and how you demonstrate that you still have command of the AI, not the other way
Hmm.
around, is very pertinent in the finance industry and probably many other industries as well.
Yeah, yeah, and in fact, I mean, I've worked in a part of what I call not high finance, but low finance, where that was the case, and it was interesting there that effectively, like using things like decision trees were preferred to
Yeah.
neural networks. But then I think there was, I actually went through the process of decomposing the loan system that they had, or the thing that was making the judgments about this. And effectively, what they had done is created the equivalent of a multi-layer perceptron using things that just decision trees with a. I think it's. I mean, you mentioned about neural networks. I think they are often people are saying, oh, they're black boxes, they're black boxes. They are in principle explainable, and there's been some amazing work recently by the people at Anthropic taking apart Claude and showing these sort of effectively biological circuits about the reasoning networks. And so maybe that's something that in those regulated industries. I think
Yeah.
the
Ultimately, you can get to a human and say, Bob, Kate, why did you do this? And they can't explain it, but you can hold a human to account.
you can hold it
You
indeed so.
you can't you cannot put your server in jail. It serves no
Mm.
purpose. But you
Well,
can potentially put someone who's given poor advice because they didn't
yeah,
have any
yeah.
particular reason for making a recommendation. You can, that's what regulation is. You regulate
But
the
yeah,
operation of the industry.
I wonder if cutting the Gordian knot there will be putting AIs in embodied robot bodies, and then they can be put in prison, and then the regulators will be happy. It's a,
Yeah,
but
it's a
but
scary
yeah.
future.
But so then maybe we can focus on how AI is affecting your life. And I'm finding myself searching Google or DuckDuckGo much less frequently than I did in the past. I am much more frequently asking AIs for like working out this, that, and almost anything. Are you finding your day-to-day habits have been changed by the new AI or not so much?
Yeah, I think so. And I think even Google's worked this out because obviously Google now gives you the AI summary, doesn't it, at the
Mm,
top of the
mm,
page to try and retain the people that are still using the Google homepage to
mm.
search. I think, I use the chat type stuff. I tend to go via duck.ai. This is not a
Oh,
personal necessarily a recommendation, but duck.ai of the DuckDuckGo browser fame.
oh,
They
okay.
do have they have a wrapper, so you can choose ChatGPT or
Oh,
Claude or
really?
various other engines
Ah,
and DuckDuckGo is obviously a privacy biased browser,
incorrect.
and
Indeed.
Duck.ai is a privacy biased wrapper
Oh,
to these
fantastic.
engines. So
Oh,
they
I'll check
have
that
some
out. Yeah.
agreements with ChatGPT whereby whatever you enter into Duck.ai will be sent to ChatGPT and you'll get the answer from ChatGPT, but it'll be
Okay.
anonymized and it won't be attributable or in any way to yourself, which I think is quite good. So I tend to use that if I'm going searching for a sort of ChatGPT like response,
Mm,
which I
mm,
do. I have to say, these sort of chat-based AI interfaces that we have at the moment, they kind of remind me of a young puppy.
mm.
They're extremely happy to be alive.
Yes.
They're joyous to be part of your life.
Mm, mm,
They're very eager to please you,
mm.
and yet they sometimes urinate on your carpet.
Indeed. Indeed.
So you've got to be, you've got to love them, but you've also got to be firm in that they
Mm.
obviously they hallucinate, they make mistakes, and they're quite confident, aren't they? When they
Oh,
make a
yeah.
mistake, they're not very diffident about it. I was showing my father an example of ChatGPT, and I was showing him it was just some information about the computers he used to work on back in the day,
Yes.
and it was completely wrong. Whatever it scraped or had
Yeah.
learnt or assumed based on next best word or something was utter nonsense from
Mm,
my
mm.
father's point of view, who had actually worked on these systems, and yet it was presented in a factual,
Total confidence.
non equivocal way. And you've got to be, like I say, sometimes it just urinates on your carpet, and you've got to be careful and be prepared for that. In general, though, when it's not doing that, I do like the interaction. I would say that with reference to my sort of career in the finance industry, a bit the personal use of AI is almost a bit similar to how I would suggest companies use AI.
Uh,
And it's only a suggestion, but it would be I spent a lot of time talking to finance companies over the years and obviously working in finance companies. And I think there's this sort of feeling or need or desire to get the big result, solve the big thing,
uh-huh.
do the massive, we're going to do a press release. Company X has created this amazing thing using AI. And I think sometimes we do that in our own life. We think, oh, AI can it's a hack for life.
Hmm.
It'll fix me. It'll sort me out. And I think just as with humans, as with companies, it might be better. See, I'm being equivocal now because I'm not an AI. It might be better to start with something that's just a little bit tedious,
Hmm.
whether
Hmm.
you're a human or a company. Like, my
Mm.
example is I occasionally travel. I find airline schedules on their website extremely painful. especially if
Mm-hmm.
I've got multiple choices of destination, multiple choices of airline. It's just very boring. You ask AI, I need to be in this country, I need to get to
Mm,
this place. I've got 2 weeks. I'd like to spend some time doing some cultural stuff. Suggest an itinerary and show me some hotels I might be interested in. And it's brilliant for that.
mm,
It's fantastic for that. And it's just a tedious thing.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
It's not a showstopper. It wouldn't
Right.
make a fantastic I'm proud and thrilled type post on LinkedIn, but it gets rid of an area of tedium for me.
Mm-hmm.
I think to bring that back to the companies, as an example, I remember talking to a very large Japanese financial institution. I'm
Mm-hmm.
going to keep them nameless, but
Sure.
it could honestly, genuinely probably apply to any financial institution.
Mm-hmm.
We're in discussion with them. They mentioned that
Mm-hmm.
by their own analysis, they spent, I'm going to make the numbers up, 40,000 man hours
Mm-hmm.
wasted every year on sending each other internally spreadsheets.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They just went round and round and round and round and round with no action. I mean, people were busy tapping away.
Mm-hmm.
And go into
Mm-hmm.
any big office, people who'd sitting in front of a screen
Yeah.
and appear to be, there were signs of activity.
Yes.
And by their own analysis, they realized that 40,000 hours of this had no value whatsoever.
Right.
And you think, well, AI might be good at that, not in doing the activity, because if it has no value, it has no value,
Mm.
but in looking at the information flow. Like, how
Yes.
did that kick off? What is
Yeah.
where's that information going? And
Mm.
what is the end result? And
Mm-hmm.
just can we skip the 40,000 hours of sending it around left, right, up, down the
Sure.
organization? Because we've all had that, I think.
Mm-hmm.
If you've worked in any big company, somebody somewhere has sent you that email that says, "Hey, Paul, I wonder if you could just fill in column A and B, use the
Yeah.
format
Yeah.
to keep it consistent, and then send it off to your colleague, and then send it back to me by the end of the week, and then whoever you're sending it to collates that into some master spreadsheet
Yeah.
that they presumably create a graph from, which they paste into PowerPoint and send up the chain to some
Yeah.
manager
Yeah.
who promptly bins it, presumably,
Yeah. Yeah.
because there's never any action on these things, and
Mm.
all that information. When I was filling in column B and C, I was just taking it out of some management information system or CRM
Yeah. Yeah.
that the person who was asking for this could have presumably just accessed themselves, because that's the whole point of having that system,
Right.
is to make that kind of data visible,
Yeah. Yeah.
not to allow these sort of weird busy work processes that kick off in big companies.
Mm.
So I think it's unexciting in a way, but fix those small things, whether you're
Yeah.
human and it's whatever you find tedious, go for that. And if you're a company, just start there, because you'll get these little incremental improvements.
Mm-hmm.
That big
Mm-hmm.
Japanese financial firm will get 40,000 hours,
Mm-hmm.
man hours left, which is what, 20 man years of work. It's
Sure. Sure.
incredible. Um, and do something more productive with that. And then, the opposite side of that, sort of how do you use AI in your life or in my life, is try to resist the temptation for it to do the things that you find enjoyable as a human.
Mm-hmm.
So I've done this, I've wanted to do a sketch or something. I'm not an artist, but I might like doing a little sketch.
Mm-hmm.
But you ask AI to do it, and it's brilliant.
Mm-hmm.
It's tremendous. There are websites and AIs which will write you a song in any language
Mm.
you like, of any theme you like. Someone was saying that the number one song downloaded last month was an AI band.
Oh, really?
Yeah, apparently. And fair enough, fine. They have the AI can do these things, but I think if that's what floats your boat as a human,
Mm.
be careful about allowing AI into that area of your life,
Mm.
because you still need areas to express yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not about perfecting that. It's about having a go. It's about trying. It's
Mm-hmm.
getting the stick and whittling it to a point with your simple knife. There
Mm-hmm.
are simple pleasures there that, yes, it may be easier to use a pencil sharpener or use AI to draw your picture, or you'll write your song or edit your
Mm.
document or write your novel. But if that's what makes you happy,
Mm-hmm.
just be a little bit careful about letting AI into that area of your life. I would gently suggest pointing the machines at the bits of your life that you don't enjoy so much,
Indeed. Indeed.
and giving it a go at doing that kind of drudgery.
Yes, I think as somebody famous, I think one artist was saying, I really wanted AI to do my washing up, not to paint my pictures for me.
Perfectly put.
Yeah.
And again, it's not new, right? You and I are from England, and before both our times, but uh, who was it? It was Harold Wilson, I think. It was talking
Mm.
about the white heat of technology, a
Technology, yes.
phrase that has lived on. This is in the 1960s. if you ever read the speech,
Hmm.
which I did once, it's a beautiful speech. He
Hmm.
wasn't prime minister then, he did become prime minister later, but it was a reminder of a time when people wrote in reasonable sentences. They created paragraphs and an argument that could build over about an
Hmm.
hour of his speech.
Hmm. Hmm.
Not the times we seem to live in today, I might say, where you stand in front of a podium with three-word slogan on it, and that's your way of communicating because of
Because
how
everyone's
people.
attention span has been reduced to 3 seconds.
Yes, but if you read that, it's
Hmm.
it's a long time ago. But just to echo that, or just to reiterate that history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. Wilson was going on about the white heat of technology and how this was going to potentially revolutionize how humans work, maybe
Hmm.
taking away our jobs, how we manage the excess of leisure time we will all
Hmm.
have because
Hmm.
the computers will be doing everything. And that feels very similar to today's kind of what are we going to do? The white collar jobs are going to go away.
Hmm.
How are we going to pay for people to exist? And these are good questions. And I don't have the answers, but they're not necessarily new questions.
No.
And I suspect humans will probably find a way to toil in some activity, with
Hmm.
almost regardless of the technology advances. Because so far we've always done that, whether it's the caveman inventing the bow and arrow, or the industrial revolution, or the computer revolution, or perhaps the AI revolution. We've always somehow found ways to make sure that at least most of us end up having to do some work for a living.
Yeah, the human nature is not changing quickly, but yeah. So you mentioned
No.
Howard Wilson and a halcyon era when leaders led in a different style. Brings us on to
They
our
do.
next question, which is your own approach to leadership, and you've obviously been in a number of different leadership roles. I mean, you're talking there about helping organizations optimize their processes, but as the leader of a team, what's the key there from your point of view?
Thanks. I feel a bit trepidatious going on to the leadership thing because I think my own efforts were very much towards the lower slopes of the leadership mountain, and
Hmm. Hmm.
more often than not, I was tumbling down the scree as often as I was making slow progress up the path towards the summit. Um, but, having said that, I've been in the room with Jamie Dimon, I've been in the room with Andy Jassy. I've seen good leadership. I've certainly seen not good leadership as well.
Hmm.
I would say that, from my own experience then, without trying to echo others, from
Hmm.
my own experience, I was a technologist. I was a physicist, mathematician.
Yeah.
I came from a sort of computing interested background, so I was
Sure.
definitely, what people would call a techie, I suppose. And the usual trajectory there is you do technical things in
Hmm.
a company, you create stuff, you make a better widget, you make a faster thing, a better
Hmm.
thing, a more innovative thing, a cheaper thing. And if you have skills at that, then you become a team leader and you manage other people that you have more resources to make more
Hmm.
things, or
Hmm.
be more innovative and so on. So I did, I went up that path of team leader to um, regional leader, country leader, and all that
Hmm.
kind of
Hmm.
stuff. But fundamentally, my background was a technologist.
Hmm.
And that leads me to, I guess, with broad brushstrokes, saying that, leadership, you could divide it into sort of leadership down and leadership up, to
Hmm.
be
Okay.
very basic about it.
Hmm.
Leadership down would be the how do I get the thing done with the resources that I've got?
Right.
And you've got a certain team, you've got some money, you've got some time, you've got an objective. I think technologists make pretty good leadership down people because you're
Hmm.
used to delivering that. That's a technology question to
Hmm.
some extent. It's solve this problem. You've got
Hmm.
these resources, you've got this outcome that you're working for. And as technologists, we're pretty good at that kind of
Hmm.
workflow. And that's leadership down. And I think, you should treat your staff well, you should make sure that they grow and improve. All that stuff is absolutely correct because it'll help you be better at what you've been
Hmm.
tasked to
Hmm.
do. And I generally think technologists do quite well there. Where I think and by they obviously I'm projecting me
Hmm.
and my experience, where they're more challenged is the leadership up.
Right.
And this isn't the, laugh at your boss's jokes thing. It's
Hmm.
quite a serious thing, is that you
Hmm.
exist in an organization, and unless you're right at the top, unless you're Andy Jassy or you're Jamie Dimon, you will have a 360-degree influence Not
Mm,
just the people that work for you, not just the widget that you're trying to make or improve, but you are a widget to someone else.
mm-hmm,
And you've got to spend time on that. And I
mm,
think as techies, we're less good at that,
mm,
which is why, I mean, unless you're in a pure tech company,
mm-hmm,
where generally the most people, including management, are probably a technical background. If you're in tech but not in a necessarily a tech company, you must pay attention to how you lead upwards, what narrative you are giving upwards
mm,
about what you're
mm,
doing and why you're doing it.
mm.
Um, Otherwise, I think you will probably never reach the very highest summits that you potentially could do if that's where you want to go. I mean, not every techie wants to be Andy Jassy, right? Some of us are quite happy doing other things.
Mm.
But have a think about that because I think you've got to always look at what you're naturally adept at. And as technologists, I think leading down, we're pretty reasonable at. It's task based, it's objective based, it's
Mm.
logical. Leading up isn't so logical. You need lots more skills,
Yeah,
which
great.
I think arguably you get better at the leading up skills over time, and you get slightly worse, in my experience, over time at the technical stuff because it becomes harder and harder, and your brain becomes slightly older and more full as you get older.
Mm,
But you
mm.
get a little bit better at the leading upward stuff, um, which can be a positive thing. So you can migrate from being a sort of technologist into a more of a leader of technologists, as long as you can develop those managing up or leading up type skills.
Yeah, well, great points. And that a lot of what you're saying there resonates with my own experiences in different organizations. Yeah, as you say, that leadership up is kind of, or managing up, as it's also called.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
there's an element of cynicism about because I've used the phrase managing up and I've had it used, probably about me, but certainly about colleagues of mine. Oh, he or she manages up well, and it feels a little bit almost negative. Like they're
Mm,
very good at keeping the boss happy, but maybe less good at doing the thing they're supposed to do or keeping their team happy. So
mm,
yes, managing up absolutely, but the leadership skills required to progress up an organization is not just be better at what you're doing, delivering the
mm.
delivering the products, services, widgets, whatever you've been tasked to do. If you
Yes.
do that very, very well, that doesn't give you a free pass to become a leader upwards.
No.
Those are different skills that you need to spend a bit of time on. And I think people are less aware of that than they possibly should be. Certainly, companies aren't particularly good at nurturing that either, in my experience.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
it's something to think about.
Yeah, well, and there I'm sort of experiencing an ambiguity in my brain. It is when we're saying leadership up, it's like that's exhibiting the leadership down such that you will be pulled up, or it's the way in which you interact with the people above you.
Yeah, so leadership down is because it's task-based and you have authority downwards. You can address that in the same way that you'd address writing a computer program or
Sure, sure.
doing a task list or so on. It's a set of resources, times, constraints, and deliverables that
Mm,
you as a technologist are extremely familiar with how to juggle those particular demands and get progress.
mm,
The leadership up is what is the narrative? What are these people looking for me from me? How do I communicate? Literally, not what do I communicate,
yeah,
but how?
sure.
What are they looking for? What is it that they need to see
Yes,
you to go up? And this is not, I've made 84 widgets, I've created this
yeah,
super thing. That's taken as given. That's why you're in the job. That's why
yeah, yeah, yeah.
you'll be doing that. But to get to the next level, you've really got to have a think about that. And some make it and some don't.
Yeah, no, no, absolutely. I think the focus on the term narrative because that seems to be the currency with which senior leaders operate. It's all about the narrative. Yeah, yeah, no, absolutely. So, I mean, I guess the only thing I'd add is on the leadership down. I think that depending upon the techie, I think sometimes there may be a deficit of empathy, and I think I point that at myself. Like having
Right. It's a
been
logical based kind of
yeah.
response.
I think you're absolutely right in terms of that. The resource side of things. Yeah, logical thinking about when you this here that the other. I think one of the things that I've yeah, I mean, I think that side of it, techies will find easy. I think sometimes the leadership down, as well as the leadership up, both require a
Hmm.
level of empathy that one that I certainly didn't have that out of the box, and even getting up to a base level of
I think a
empathy
few
has
of us do.
taken many
I'll give
years.
you an example, if I may. It's I was just thinking, without name dropping at all, but I worked for AWS for a while, and there was a meeting with Andy Jassy. He wasn't head of Amazon at the time; he was head of
Mm,
AWS until he came to see us, and he was just doing an Ask Me Anything thing in the office. So I was
mm,
there along with many others. And one of the questions posed to Andy, he's younger than me, he's a very approachable kind of guy in a
mm,
working environment. Somebody just put their hand up and asked him, Andy, what do you see as the next great use case for AWS technology?
mm,
And this was more than a decade ago.
mm.
And I thought, well, that's a good question. I'd be very interested to know what the head of AWS thinks is the next great use
Yeah.
case for AWS technology. And I liked his answer though, because this
Uh-huh.
is where maybe a technologist would have given one answer, but a leader is going to give another answer.
Mm,
And he said, in the nicest possible way, I don't know and I don't care.
mm,
It's not that I don't care, as in, I don't spend time thinking about it. It's that that's not our business.
mm,
The, our customers will think of the next best use. That's their business.
mm,
Our business at AWS is providing the products and services that we do at the best quality, the best price we can possibly do it, at the best with the best innovation we can provide. We need to concentrate on that. We do not worry about what other companies are doing with that. That's their business.
mm,
And I thought, yeah, that's a much better way of answering that question than, you know what, the thing we're releasing in 3 months' time, the ABC API with
mm,
the extra
mm,
doobry that we've added, is going to transform the market for mumble, 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 which is a technologist answer and might make me as a technologist quite excited.
mm.
But as a leader of a business, I thought his view there was, oh yeah, that's how you do it.
Well, then, and that's very insightful, and I think it often. I think what we see, probably you and I have both seen in many different companies and organizations, is there's a tendency to want to say, we've come up with this idea. We think customers should use it. And of course, that it goes
Yeah.
back to Ford and like, if I'd asked the customers what they wanted, they would have wanted a faster horse. But,
Yes.
I think it's relatively rare that you have a massive revolutionary technology that suddenly is going to change the entire landscape as the car did. More often, you've got your customers, you want them to renew their contracts, you want new customers coming in, and they're going to be doing that off the back of things that they perceive as their own needs. And so if you can be absolutely locked to making sure that you are serving the needs of those customers, then in the short term, that's going to turn into good business.
Yes, agreed.
Good show. Well, on to the next question is, of course, your most exciting tech to hack. I think we've got one from you already, Duck AI. I'll be looking up that after the show. But is there anything else, in this white heat of the latest technology in 2025 that's really ringing your bell?
Yeah, I was going to say, listen to your podcast because I have learned some excellent
Oh, thank you
hacks
so
from simply listening to the smarter people you have on your podcast
much.
and the hacks that they've shared, many of which I fully intend to try,
Mm,
but of course have not yet, but we'll get around to it. And I
mm,
think that, that's part of it is there are other things. So if you're stuck on one particular chat um, thing, and if that works for you, that's fine. But by all means, take a look at the other ones as well. I, as a hack, I'm slightly wary, and this may go back to my sort of general cynicism from the back in the Penrose days of
mm,
maintaining a slightly skeptical stance.
mm,
Um, and also, I've alluded to it with the Duck AI.
mm,
It's not really a hack; it's more of an anti-hack. Is
mm.
be somewhat careful about what you share.
Right.
Um, Duck AI works for me because it has this sort of umbrella of privacy over the chat engines.
Mm,
Um, and I think in our excitement, we share data that we have to feel that potentially, whether it's anonymized or not, but regardless,
mm,
it's potentially there for the rest of time.
mm,
And
mm,
if that's generic, I'd like to solve this coding program, absolutely fine. If it's something about you or your family or your friends or your aspirations or your job, be super, super careful. People say this, I know, and it's not really a hack, but exercise caution, I think.
mm.
You look for things like Duck AI. Just, very simple example. I'm going to anonymize this anecdote if I may, but there
Sure.
was a situation where someone was getting tired of looking at one of the famous websites that advertises technology jobs.
Mm,
Um, so he or she asked Google's Gemini Deep Research, "Here's my resume. Here's where I live. What do you recommend?"
mm,
And Gemini's deep research came back with an extremely long and useful, I mean, 10, 12 pages of, okay, this is what you're good at. This is where your experience will fit. Here are
Mm,
some jobs from
mm,
various different websites. And for each of those jobs, it gave you a, this is how you'd be good at this. This is where you'd
mm,
be challenged. This is where you might be able to negotiate. It just did all the work.
mm, mm.
Back to my previous point about find something that you find tedious.
Tedious. Yeah.
So this person was getting very tired of surfing the job sites. And so he asked AI to help. And I think that's a reasonable hack. I would only add that now Google's Gemini Deep Research has his resume and has
Mm,
his career history, his name, his contacts, and you would hope that there's a lot of privacy protection around that, but you have volunteered that information. So,
mm, mm.
without being too casting a cloud over this kind of stuff, because it's genuinely useful, but just be careful about what you share with a personal nature, because it may last forever.
Indeed, indeed.
Which, as Prince taught us, is a very long time.
Wise words, wise words. Well, talking about that very long time, that leads us nicely into our next question, which is about your perception of the future of AI. We living in these very interesting times, as the Chinese would curse us to have. I think you and I have been in technology our whole lives. I think we're both quite impressed with the latest round of LLMs and so on. Nobody has a crystal ball. I mean, I think as you're connecting to the whole I mean, I was reading an article recently about new AWS data centers, which are, like huge amounts of money is being put into this kind of AI space race, shall we say, not just AWS, but everybody to get, these GPUs, there sort of seems to be a kind of race to who can create AGI first going on. But what do looking back over the last 40 years and looking forward now, what do you see is likely going to happen in the next few years or further out?
I could thank you for that question. I just felt slightly old when he said, looking back over the last 40 years. Um, I'm tempted to, when people ask what's going to happen in the future, I'm tempted to go back to my physicist roots and quote Niels Bohr with his
Mm,
famous quote that predictions are very difficult,
yes,
especially about the future,
yes, indeed.
which I found is quite applicable to many things, especially AI.
Mm,
Um, where do I think it's going? It's interesting you mentioned the AWS data centers. I remember when I first walked into them, my job at AWS was building these things
yeah.
as they expanded the cloud in Asia. Um, and I'd already built data centers since the early 90s for some very well-funded international banks. So
Mm,
to my mind, they were very state-of-the-art data centers. And I
mm,
remember walking into the AWS, or the first AWS data center I saw, and it was like Neo waking up in the Matrix with a big
right.
thing in the back of his head and
Yes.
unplugging and going, "Oh, I see."
Right. Right.
Because they were a decade ahead. It was staggering how
Mm,
far ahead, and I suspect that will probably continue. I think there
mm,
is a there is an acceleration factor of if you're ahead to begin with, you will keep forging ahead, and it's
mm,
quite hard to catch up. So I
mm,
think
mm,
not just AWS, but obviously Google is very impressive, and Microsoft and the Chinese company. They all have these incredible capabilities.
mm.
I So without getting into, where will that tech go, I think the AI progress, going back to my jokey, the puppy tends to urinate on the carpet
Yeah.
comment, the hallucinations, the confidently getting things wrong is clearly something that has been improving
Mm,
immensely, really. I mean, I mean, we can all remember the first time we asked AI to draw a
yeah.
picture of a man, and it had 3 arms and 2 feet, two
Yeah.
heads, and it's getting better. Now it's
Yes.
often only got 6 fingers, and
Yeah. Yeah.
that will just keep accelerating. The hallucinations will get fewer, I think. But
Mm,
that brings me to the kind of future state is the elimination of hallucinations, if that's a target. But if that's a target, does that get us sort of dangerously close to a sort of AI agreed truth? Now, it's not a
mm,
philosophy podcast, so you could spend an awful lot of time stroking your metaphorical goatee about what is truth. But I mean, if all the AIs agree this is what this prompt should return.
Mm,
Is that desirable? Does that mean we've reached a state
mm,
of perfection? I would suggest no, clearly, 'cause that's why I'm asking the question. My view is, we need the mistakes.
mm,
We need, going back to my sort of scientific background and your scientific background, when we have doubt,
mm,
that's when we have to think, when we maybe back to the Penrose thing, when we make a conjecture about something and we don't know the answer, we may make a mistake, but that's how we learn and potentially move forward.
mm,
And I'm hoping that the direction of AI isn't sort of convergence towards some kind of AGI, I think you've been calling it, to some kind of omni AI that's kind of got the answer to everything. And the answer is the answer, and that's what we all
mm,
agree.
mm, mm.
This is what the AI has decided, and your poor human brain, with its limited amount of data that it can analyze, couldn't possibly be better. I think that's would be inadvisable at at best. And I
Mm.
think again, I keep referencing Penrose, but his view of can computers think. I think that's where you want to get to, isn't it? Is you want to get to the point where the human tendency to doubt or
Yeah.
to think. This obviously not a new view here. Goes back to Descartes and his
Hmm.
cogito ergo sum. I think
Hmm.
therefore I am. The ability to think and doubt and then come up with something as a conjecture that may be wrong. It may be a hallucination, but
Mm,
then to
mm.
be able to analyze that and iterate and get,
Yeah.
why is that wrong? That's hopefully that's where that one's going. I'd love that to be the case because then you feel like what was that Bernard Shaw quote about the unreasonable man molds the world to match his own requirements, whereas the reasonable man molds himself to match the world.
Right.
Therefore, all progress is made by the unreasonable man
Mm,
because he's molding the world to fit him. And I think you could apply that to AI is it should be unreasonable. It should be a little bit messy. It should make mistakes. It should be
mm,
able to learn from that. And if you get, and maybe it does already, but I'd hope that's the direction it goes and not some kind of convergence of output, which I think would be poor. There you go.
mm. Yeah. No, fascinating. Well, I think you're making a strong argument for diversity of thought, diversity of
Yeah.
opinion, and these
Yeah.
things.
Maybe that's where humans come in. Maybe we're the grit in the oyster that creates the pearl.
Indeed, indeed. That's I often say that in my comedy gigs when I'm not being very funny, as I'm the grit in the as the MC to help these other pearls shine. Yes, yes. I mean, I find, and this connects back to the thread from earlier where as you like you said, these very confident puppies. It seems extraordinary to me that it just seems so simple, and I've done it with ChatGPT, like because you can add your own rules, and I have my family using ChatGPT. I've added the rule. The first rule is, you know, I'm not sure, and I might make mistakes. And so every interaction that I have now with ChatGPT, the first thing it says is, right, okay, great question. I'm not sure. I might make mistakes. I don't see why every AI company doesn't have that effectively disclaimer built into the first element of the, like they've got it written in small print at the bottom of the screen
Yes.
somewhere.
Yes.
But like, you know, it seems to me a massive oversight and bordering on, what's the right I can't remember what word, but, you know,
Sort of AA at the moment. It's artificial arrogance.
yeah, and it just seems like, surely you should be flagging front and center that this thing can make mistakes. Like it's oh, my vocabulary box has failed me. But anyway, I mean I think that's very important. And I guess it is also something that makes me think about where we are with AI is at the moment it does feel very much like that this odd sort of training cycle of like I think GPT-5 is going to be coming out fairly soon and we'll see what that brings to, but the conversations that you have with them, one of the things I get the sense is that it feels like they're not learning as you're talking. Like, for example, you and I can be talking, and we can like agree a point, and then we can build on it. Whereas there's some sense in which these current AIs are very forgetful, and you think you've established this is our way of working, and they don't. They're not building a kind of coherent personality. Maybe that would.
No, I think your previous interview with the Chat GPT 4.0 showed that the kind of real-time response, at least technically, is there, but the
Yes.
real-time thought to
Mm.
your question is not there. It's using a previously uh, kind
Yeah.
of map or previously analyzed sort of response and giving that response to you in real time, but it's not really reacting in the way that right now two humans can react to what we
Right.
each say to each other in real time. So our ability to process information is limited in bandwidth and depth and
Right.
scale,
Right.
but on what we have available to us, we can do it very quickly,
Yeah. Yeah.
which I think is kind of interesting.
Yeah, and we're able to build in a way that the AIs, I think, currently can't, at least in a podcast format. But so that brings us, I think, neatly, or if not neatly, rather messily, because mess is very important. We discussed lots of diversity. What does it all mean? This life, this universe, this everything. I mean, yesterday I was speaking on my I asked the same question on my comedy podcast, and the Arab individual was like, oh, like it's a luxury, to ask this question. What does it all mean? Like, and so one might interpret this as a sort of like undergraduate question of like, hey guys, like, what's the universe? But I think, answer to this question can be, oh, I think this is all of a simulation. Oh, I think this is we're dreams in the mind of God. But it can be the things that give meaning to my life are this. I mean, I think it's, we are all in this strange experience, or at least we're kind of like I mean, who knows if any what is real or what not is real. But how do you make sense of the experience of life so far, and what guides you going forward?
Yeah, it feels like, well, it's a startlingly in-depth question. Um, One that I'm not sure that AI is yet helping me to answer.
Hmm.
I We've already sort of discussed the how did the philosophers, and we mentioned Descartes and the I think therefore I am, which kind of gets you into the realm of at least we know we exist. So
Hmm.
because we have doubts,
Hmm.
the doubts
Hmm.
cause us to think. The fact that we are thinking axiomatically suggests we exist.
Hmm.
Are we in a simulation? I think at some point, and I'm riffing here, does it matter? Because this is what we have, right? If we understand we exist, then regardless of whether we're in the great snowball of the gods, which they're tipping upside down for their own entertainment,
Hmm.
or if there's just simply a mathematical progression of consequences as atoms smash and do their thing, following the hour of time, whichever or wherever we are in that particular breadth of possibilities, this is it. The small ray of light that is shining upon the particular moment in time that we happen to exist in right now is a narrow one.
Hmm.
And it's entertaining and interesting. And I think, the unexamined life, to go back to the philosophers, is not worth living. It is worth examining it, but it's also, you be careful about worrying about it because this is it. So
Hmm.
regardless, you're in it. Do
Right.
do as you will. I think,
Hmm.
who was it? It was Kurt Vonnegut when he was talking to his son about life and what does it all mean? And I think it was his son, so it wasn't Kurt, but I think it was his son who said, "We are here to help each other get through this thing."
Hmm.
And I think that's probably about as good as an approach as I can imagine.
Beautiful. Fantastic. Fantastic. Great stuff. Well, Paul, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. Is there, if people want to chat to you, I guess what's a good way to reach out and get in touch?
Moved to Japan, knocked me up. Uh, I'm very social media averse. I'm deliberately somewhat hard to find.
Hmm.
Um, Probably not going to change that approach. Uh, yeah, if you do find me, that's tremendous. I don't mean to come across all Morpheus-like,
Hmm.
um, but for various reasons, I'm happier to stay well away from the the limelight. But I am very interested in this area. I'm interested
Hmm.
in many of the things we've spoken about today. So I will certainly follow them, and I'd be happy to, contact those that are sort of interested in that area as well.
Great show. Great stuff. And is there anything that you wanted to promote at all? Any activities coming up, or again, just you'll stay in the shadows?
Well, personally, I'll stay in the shadows. But if you're doing a comedy gig in Tokyo, I
Mm,
would be delighted to either promote that if you were to respond to this with the next the next date that you'll be performing, because I always find that excellent. Apart from that,
okay.
no, I look forward to the summer heat declining and my AI air conditioner going back to its less power hungry self.
Good show. Good show. Well, maybe we'll include my comedy social media links in the post. Thanks for um,
You absolutely should.
promoting me on your behalf. Well, thanks everyone. That wraps up this episode of AI Leadership. If you'd like to be on the podcast or join the Rebel AI community that it all started from, please don't hesitate to reach out to me, Sam Joseph. That's sam@neurogrid.com, and we'll be in your ears again real soon. Finally, big thanks to our guest today, Paul Marshall.
Thank you very much, Sam. It's been a pleasure.